Hello people, how's it going? Scotty. So here we have Social Democrat 01 spreading lies again.
Scott M has made another video response to me where he uses his usual tactics. You see, when he knows that he is losing the debate, he tries directing the debate elsewhere. For example, in his so-called response he mentions Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, Thatcher, the failed private road system.
The very reason why I mentioned the history in relation with the United States of America, with Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, the turnpike industry and various other things, was in relation to part of what he had said. He said that capitalism was to do with, corporatism, and that was the argument. We've even got him saying this here.
Actually, corporatism is a form of capitalism.
So you see, he's a pathological liar. He tries to make it out as if I changed the subject and ever. I simply pointed out in relation with American history, simply because of the fact we've got it down in recorded history, that from the likes of the Sugar Act, from the Stamp Act, from the Townsend Act, from the tea tariff, all these things, it was actually the capitalist class that led the charge to end the mercantilism. Even the American Revolution itself was largely a capitalist revolution. It was the capitalist merchant class who formed the Boston Tea Party and fought the American Revolution, the war, in order to give America its independence. Even the American Constitution itself is based off protecting capitalism. Now that was a war against British mercantilism, and if you don't know what mercantilism is, it's basically corporatism. It was the likes of Alexander Hamilton, a socialist, who basically supported the First National Bank. He was the one that founded the First National Bank. He was an opposition to Thomas Jefferson. Now Thomas Jefferson was a classical liberal. He supported small and limited government, whereas, Alexander Hamilton was a big supporter of the big, strong national government. He wanted a national government. That's what he wanted. He wanted a king similar to George of Great Britain. He wanted a king who would oversee all legislation and no one would also have a say on the matter. That's what he supported. He supported all the high taxation to subsidise the rich off the back of the poor. And he was the founder of crony capitalism in the United States. He was an enemy of the classical liberal capitalist, Thomas Jefferson. And this is why I pointed out the history, because it was the socialists who viewed corporatism as an improvement to that of capitalism itself. And we've got this quotation here. Anti-capitalists of all varieties have always praised mercantilism. As Murray Rothbard wrote, government intervention-minded Keynesian economists, quote, hail mercantilists as prefiguring their own economic insights. Marxists, constitutionally unable to distinguish between free enterprise and special privilege, hail mercantilism as a progressive step in the historical development of capitalism. Socialists and interventionists salute mercantilism as anticipating modern state building and central planning. So you'll remember my first video, it was basically on, the definition of socialism. And I was pointing out, of course, not just the dictionary, as saying in the video that you must look at other things, you must look at history. It's not just a case of looking at the synonym of collectivism, which is socialism. You have to look at the definitions, you have to look at real world practice. It's not just a case of looking at theories and putting theory above practice, and I did of course point all these things out, which of course you heard me saying here. But of course it's not just as simple as looking at the synonym, we have to also look at socialism, its definition, collectivism, its definition, look at both definitions, look at recorded history, and you can see they both are exactly the same. Again, we'll revert to what Social Democrat 01 had said in his video.
Actually, corporatism is a form of capitalism.
You see, this is what I'm talking about, people. It's people such as himself who are pathological liars. He's trying to say that this was off topic. It was on topic. It was on topic because he was trying to spread lies, that trying to pass corporatism off on capitalism, saying it's a form of capitalism. It's not a form of capitalism, and that is why I pointed out this. The word capitalism is an individualist ideology. It falls under individualism. You cannot take capitalism, the opposite of collectivism, and shove capitalism under collectivism. You just cannot. You can't do it, because it's another word for socialism. How can you take capitalism and shove it under the same meaning as basically what socialism is?
They wouldn't go into the streets and say, get rid of capitalism. What they'd be saying is, let's get rid of socialism, let's get rid of communism, let's get rid of fascism, let's get rid of collectivism. That's the real word that covers all of that, and let's go back to individualism.
A lot of times, libertarians and supporters of the free market are called fascists, right? It's a stupid, inane remark to make. How could we possibly be fascists?
They wouldn't go into the streets and say, get rid of capitalism. What they'd be saying is, let's get rid of socialism, let's get rid of communism, let's get rid of fascism, let's get rid of collectivism. That's the real word that covers all of that, and let's go back to individualism.
When fascism was developed specifically as an alternative to laissez-faire capitalism, that was expressly the goal of the thing.
Again, people, it's not just a case of looking at the synonym of something. It's important to understand and look at, of course, the various definitions, and look at recorded history, compare it, look at what socialism, and it's very important to say, because I said this before, I said this: people fail to understand common sense. They don't understand that just because you have something on paper, just because you said something, just because it was theoretical, and just because this is what it was supposed to be. The key word there, supposed to be. Supposed. Okay? The key word, supposed to be. Just because it was supposed to be doesn't mean to say that when you put it into practice, it's going to turn out that way. The point being that when we look at socialism, we have to look at what it is in practice. I mean, that's the most important thing. It's what actual socialist governments have achieved. It's the socialism the world has actually seen. Not the socialism inside their head. Not the socialism written on paper. It's all well having something down on paper, but what's the point of what's on paper when you put it into practice and human nature defies it? It's a bit like someone talking about the theory of socialism being moneyless, but when you put that into practice and you look around you, everyone is demanding higher paid wages. It's defying it. And this is the prime example of what I'm talking about. We have to look at the definitions. We have to look at, of course, not just the synonym for collectivism. In order to see, you have to look at the practice and the recorded history. And that's something that he's desperate to do, is basically brush it under the carpet.
Rants about the dictionary meaning of collectivism, which he does in almost every video, and largely avoids the issue in question. He also makes this idiotic claim.
You don't have capitalism in Great Britain today as a system. You don't have it today in the United States of America as a system. So as we can see from his ignorance, where he tried to claim that corporatism is just another form of capitalism, then of course he would try and claim that I went off topic, but I never. And you see, the whole issue is with corporatism, because he doesn't understand what it is. Corporatism is the merger between state and corporations. That's the complete opposite of capitalism. Capitalism is the separation of the economy from government. The more you move away from the separation of the economy from government, you're moving away from capitalism. Whilst we do have certain capitalism today, such as our trade and the capital available to us, such as the likes of our machinery, etc., that exchange in the marketplace, it's not free. So we don't have a capitalist system. We may have some capitalism today, such as our trade in the marketplace. But capitalism is being strangled to death because of socialism, because of all the socialist government regulations. And this is where he gets confused, because he doesn't understand that it's not a capitalist system we have today, it's a corporatist system. And corporatism is a collectivist system. Corporatism being the merger between state and corporations. The state being the main element of the economy, the government gets to pick and choose winners and losers. Not only is the government picking and choosing winners and losers, the state has the power to forcibly force taxation out of people's hands collectively. I'll repeat that again. When you have a society forced into a collective group to serve the state, that is collectivism. That's not individualism. Individualism simply means that the individual is the primary element of the economy. It means that the individual is free from the state to look after his own economic finances and pursue his own economic goals and paths. In other words, it's individual responsibility. When you have a system where the government is the main element of the economy, and the government holds the power to force taxation out of people's hands collectively, and the government then subsidises those who are making losses, such as the big corporations, that is not capitalism. There is no such thing as bailouts under capitalism. Bailouts do not exist under capitalism. Bailouts, another word for subsidising, subsidising is all part of socialism. That redistribution of wealth, the government, coercion, that is a defining ethic of socialism. Government force, government taking taxpayers' money out of their hands collectively, a collectivist system because people are forced into a collective group, forced to pay taxation to government. That's all part of socialism. That government coercion is socialism, and the government's redistribution of their wealth to fund the losses of others is all part of socialism. They don't call it capitalism for the poor and socialism for the rich for nothing. Another term for it, as we would call it, subsidising, of course, for the rich. We would call this, of course, capitalising on all the gains and socialising all the losses. What it simply means is that the gains these big corporations make, they get to keep the gains. But any losses that they make is the government forcing the taxpayers to pay for it. Therefore, the rich get to live for free off of all their own losses. Government protectionism of losses is socialism. That's not capitalism. And the reason why it's not capitalism is because under capitalism you have individual responsibility, and if you make losses, you face and pay for your own losses. You face liquidation whether you like it or not. Capitalism is all about punishing failure and rewarding success. Capitalism is not about, punishing success and rewarding failure. Anyone who tries to claim that capitalism is about punishing success and rewarding failure simply doesn't have a clue what capitalism is. Government protectionism. Governments force taxation on people collectively, forced into a collective group. And government subsidising of those who make the losses. All of that is part of socialism. It's a socialised based system. Corporatism uses government's regulations to stamp out competition. That's how they become wealthy and powerful. So in other words, they use socialism in order to stamp out the competition to gain all the wealth and power for themselves. That's what corporatism's all about. Whilst corporatism may not be socialism as basically heading towards, communism, we understand that. But what corporatism basically is socialism in practice. Since when have you ever seen socialism get rid of the private sector? Socialism couldn't do that, because it needs the private sector. So it's all well talking about socialism theoretically and how it completely gets rid of the private sector, which I've already spoken about in length. But you cannot put theory above practice. Socialism cannot get rid of the private sector because it's the private sector that funds all their socialism. But just because the fact that it hasn't got rid of the private sector, don't think for 1 second that socialism isn't present. Of course socialism's present, because socialism's not black and white. Socialism is state direction of the economy. State direction of the economy has got nothing at all to do with capitalism. Capitalism is the separation of the economy from government. It's not a free market. How can you call it a free market when the government's regulating all the price controls and everything else? The whole point of the issue being is the fact that it's the government that's directing everything. It's the government that's choosing the winners and the losers. So socialism is strongly present. Whilst capitalism may be present in terms of having your trade or your capital, such as the certain things like your assets and all the rest of it, not as a system. Capitalism as a system does not exist today in the United States of America or Great Britain. Capitalism as a system means that you have an economy strongly free from government, where it's the market that determines basically prices, where it's the market that determines your interest rates. Is he honestly trying to tell you that our interest rates are determined by the free market? Is he having a laugh? For the past 100 years, you've had a central bank that's basically been manipulating your interest rates, changing things like reserve ratios, printing fiat currency out of thin air. A free market, you cannot have a free market without free market money. Money being in the hands of the people, not in the hands of banks, not in the hands of the government. It's the government that's determining everything. Government direction of the economy is socialism. So yes, socialism is present. Yes, there's certain things of capitalism that are existing today. But capitalism's been strangled to death because of all the government regulations, all the socialism in this mixed economy. And it's because of the mixed economy that gave rise to the corporatist system. And corporatism is a collectivist ideology. As if that wasn't bad enough, he then goes on about this.
What about PCCW in Hong Kong? Now, Scottium usually uses Hong Kong as the only true example of capitalism, which is indeed hilarious. But watch him now try to claim that Hong Kong is corporatist and therefore socialist. His ideology is simply a faith-based religion. No practical example of it exists in the real world today.
Well, two important things about Hong Kong is the very fact that Hong Kong between 1961 and 1997, and I don't know how many times I've pointed out those dates. The reason why I pointed out those dates is because there's quite a big difference between what Hong Kong was between 1961 to 1997 to that of Hong Kong between 1997 to 2015. And that is because the fact that Hong Kong was, leased back to China. But the most important point is the issue is the fact that he's talking about these monopolies. It's quite laughable because I asked for monopolies that were caused more or less, although I didn't say it in these words, this is what I intentionally meant. I asked for monopoly examples that were caused by the free market. Basically caused by the free market. I never asked for monopolies that he's pointing out that were basically caused by the state. I asked for examples of monopolies that were caused by the free market. Hong Kong has a relatively strong free market. You wouldn't say it's 100%. There's never been such a thing as 100%. No one's ever claimed that there's ever been a truly free market. I don't ever claim to have ever said that. But when we look at, for example, an example like Hong Kong, Hong Kong's a perfect example of the problem with the government. It's the government that owns the land. In fact, it was largely the government that was the fault of such monopolies. As we can see, it says Hong Kong's property market is dominated by a few large developers who account for the majority of the private sector production. But who is it that leases that land? Well, it says Hong Kong government leases land for development on a 50-year basis. So in other words, you're talking about a few large companies that basically, or shall I say a few large developers who dominate the property market of the private sector production. They dominate it simply because they're getting it from the government. So who's the fault? Is it the free market or is it the government? Of course it's the government. It's the government that's leasing the land. We've even got the example of Hong Kong Electric. It talks about two vertically integrated power companies owning generation, distribution grid and retail and geographic monopolies. You've probably never heard of the natural monopolies in your life. The myth of the natural monopolies. But of course I'll leave that in the description area below.
Well, Scotty M, if you knew what you were talking about, you would know that privatization that was implemented by the Nazis literally is the opposite of collectivism.
Well, that's the thing, you don't understand individualism and collectivism, because individualism means that the basis of society, the primary element of the economy, is the individual. That's referring to each and every single individual of society. That's talking about the people of society. It means that people like me and every other person out there like me all have their own economic independence. They can follow freely their own economic goals and paths without the interference of government, and that they're all economically independent financially. Are you honestly trying to tell me that the people of society in Nazi Germany were economically independent, financially independent from the state? That is nothing other than lies. Whilst there has never been 100% of each, there's never been 100% collectivism, 100% individualism. Individualism simply means that the basis of society, the economy, is the individual that's free from the state. In other words, the normal people of society. We're not talking about just people who are business owners, we're talking about the whole of society, okay? Are you trying to tell me the whole of society was economically and independent from the Nazi government with regards to the economy? Is that honestly what you're trying to tell me? You're trying to tell me that the Nazi government was limited, small, weak, and a servant to the people. That's what individualism is. That's 100% what individualism is. That's what individualism is. That's what individualism basically is. Is that what you're trying to tell me Nazi Germany was? Where the government was limited and basically a servant to the people individually? Is that what you're trying to tell me that Nazi Germany was? You're nothing other than a pathological liar. What collectivism basically is where the state, that's right, the government, is the main element of the economy. And it means that the people collectively serve the government. It means the government is the director of the economy. The Nazi government had centralised the entire economy. They centralised education by nationalising it. They centralised healthcare by nationalising it. They even, nationalised the automobile industry in Austria. They nationalised the churches in Austria. They done so much more. They even had their own trade unions called the German Labour Front that you try to deny were trade unions. That's how desperate you are. They basically centralised the entire German economy. They controlled and directed the entire economy. That's collectivism. You're basically that ignorant. You really are that ignorant. You're basically trying to redefine what individualism means. Individualism means that the basis of society is the individual, and the state is nothing other than a servant and limited to what it can do economically to the people. If that's honestly what you're trying to say, what Nazi Germany was, you need to seek mental help.
It is moving property out of the collective sector into the hands of the individual. That is anti-collectivism. Privatization is the most anti-collectivist policy you can implement. See, the fact that you keep ranting about collectivism shows how ignorant you are.
Really? So it's anti-collectivist for a government to strongly force taxation on the whole of society collectively to redistribute their wealth to pay for the losses of private industry, is it? That's anti-collectivist. So if it's anti-collectivist, why is the whole of society forced to pay taxation to pay for the losses of them?
Well, Hong Kong's longest-serving British governor introduced these policies between 1971 and 1982.
And no, I wouldn't be pointing out Hong Kong as if it's some socialist-based state. Because as I said, nothing is ever black and white. Yes, the government is the ownership over land, and I've always said that. Yes, the government had implemented state health care in Hong Kong. And as you pointed out certain policies, I said there's nothing ever black and white. Do you just choose to ignore things? Is that what you basically do? You just choose to ignore things? I mean, it's a bit like saying, okay, we have the British NHS, therefore it's a socialist economy. That's not how things work. It's not black and white like that. Nothing's black and white. Nothing's ever 100%. Nothing's fixated. It's not something fixated. It's a scale. It's a question of your market. Is it strongly free for Hong Kong to do business exchange in the marketplace? Are the prices largely in the market set by the market, or is it largely set by the government? These are all important questions. That's what you have to look at. I said between 1961 to 1997 there was strong economic freedom for business exchange. You're going on about the whole thing to do with, oh well, Hong Kong has, state healthcare, state education, has these certain things that are implemented. Yeah, that's all well said and done. But does that change the fact that Hong Kong has a strong free market and had a strong free market in that time period? No, it doesn't. You seem to look at the term free market and something black and white. That's what you do. This is honestly what you do. Your mind is kind of like this. That if it's not exactly this, that if it's not exactly this, where there's absolutely no socialism available at all, then this is what a free market is. And if there's certain wee things such as these socialist principles such as state healthcare, education, etc., then apparently it's not a free market. That's how your mind works. It's just like how your mind works in black and white, where you kind of look at for example, let's say we look at socialism, where you say, well, socialism, there's private ownership available, there's certain a private sector, therefore because there's a wee bit of a private sector, there's no socialism. No, it's a scale. It's a question of how socialist your economy is to how capitalist your economy is. It's a scale. The freer your economy is from the state, the more capitalist it is. Now, if you compare Hong Kong in that regard to, for example, other countries, Hong Kong is strongly capitalist. You wouldn't say it's a purely free market. Where have I ever said that? Where did I ever say that? You just took the gun and shot yourself in the foot again. Nothing's ever purely 100%. So what you did there was you wasted your time and you completely ignored what I said. What did I say? I said this. Now, of course, Social Democrat 01 does mention about the privatisation, but that's where it ends. Everything to him is black and white. That's where it ends. He's got a very black and white view of economics and politics in general. In other words, in his head, nationalisation and all the rest of this, socialism, and then privatisation where it stops is basically capitalism. We understand that private ownership is an element of capitalism, but it's not as black and white as that. And this is why I mentioned about the government's control over private industry. And that is not capitalism. Capitalism's not about strong government regulation. Government regulation, and this is what he doesn't like, government regulation is in reference to socialism. Now, we know that there's never been a truly 100% socialist economy or a 100% capitalist style economy. What do you think it's all about when we speak about quality controls being determined by consumers themselves? That's the market that's self-regulating. That is capitalism. So it's always been this age-old argument between capitalists and socialists. Socialists have always argued that capitalism's unsustainable because of the lack of government regulations. That's the truth. Why else do you think they blamed the banking crisis on capitalism? They tried to claim that Margaret Thatcher deregulated the economy and therefore the banking crisis occurred. That is the truth. That is the goddamn truth. You see, this is where people like Social Democrat 01 contradict himself. What's he going to do? Is he going to make up lies and try and say that government's regulation isn't socialism? Social Democrat 01. The amount of historians out there that wrote a pack of lies about the Industrial Revolution, and this is historians today. Largely all of that information about the Industrial Revolution, and yes, you can talk about this changing the subject, but it's not actually changing the subject. This is in relation to your source, the Cambridge University. You believe everything historians tell you within a university. Do you really? If that's the case, and let's say that is what you're holding on to, because this is what you are. You're holding on to Cambridge University as a source as if this is 100% true. If that's the case, how come Mises Institute and libertarianism.org completely flattened every socialist on the Industrial Revolution? Because let's face it, all your universities out there, that's right, including Cambridge University, tried to claim that during the Industrial Revolution, living standards and wealth declined and collapsed in the first Industrial Revolution. Yet there we have it, statistical evidence and historical recorded evidence that contradicts them and proves them wrong. So all you've done is you've taken from one source of information from two historians and said this is 100% correct, and you haven't even seen the alternative. That's what you've done. That's all you've done. You've pulled off a Thomas Piketty. And Thomas Piketty was someone who wrote a book on the disaster of capitalism and all this nonsense. Guess what? This guy who wrote that source, and all these socialists who ran to Thomas Piketty and they were saying, oh, Thomas Piketty's finally blown capitalism out the water, just like what you've just done there. Completely blown capitalism out the water with this one source. Guess what? Thomas Piketty was confronted by historians from the Mises Institute, such as Tom Woods and Robert P. Murphy. And what they pointed out was, from reading his source, his book, what they pointed out was, this Thomas Piketty couldn't even get his dates right on the Great Depression. He couldn't even get his dates right. If you can't even get your dates right, how can you be taken seriously as a so-called historian? So, you see, although you may try and claim this is changing the subject, it's not. What I'm saying is, you're taking one source of information, Cambridge University, and you're saying this is 100% the truth. Really. This is the same type of thing they all said about the, Industrial Revolution, where the living standards had collapsed. If that's the case, Why did a socialist historian come out and admit that between 1790 to 1840 that living standards had actually improved?